I had a little trouble also with my lighting, so a couple things haven't quite been as good. Let me see. In fact, it doesn't quite look the way I usually want it. It's too dark, but I may have to just go with it. Let's see if that helps a little bit. Maybe that. Yeah, I don't know. I lost a little bit of the lighting. I think I got the rest of it handled, but the lighting has been a whole new thing. As I mentioned the other day, I have a new setup, so it's been a little difficult. I'm just gonna go with it the way it is, and I think it's okay. So thank you all for joining me for a second day. If you want to see what we tried to do yesterday, it was my first attempt back in a few months with a new setup, and it was going okay for a while. A few little bugs. But then, right as we got started with the show, part 28, Bible and Trinity in Conflict, um, it had problems. So I found out what the problem was, and so I corrected it. But in the course of doing that, I had to do a few other things, which kind of reset things again. So I haven't been able to get the lighting the way I wanted. I apologize for that. But the sound should be good. And what I have to show you should be fine as well. So let me know if you have any problems with the sound. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and proceed, regardless of whether the lighting is perfect. We'll just deal with it and cover the material because that's the main goal. Now, I talked a little bit about a few other related things yesterday. I left the stream that we did, whatever we did, up. So, and then I titled it, right, it's the failed attempt of this show. But we did cover a couple things that might be useful to you. So check it out if you want to. I also talked a little bit about why we're doing this particular show now. And specifically, it has to do with Dr. White's and Sam Shamoon's use of 1 Corinthians 8:6 as if they are the equivalent, Lord in that text, of the Lord in the Septuagint of Deuteronomy 6:4 for Yahweh, Yahweh. So the way they presented it is not really new from what they've done before, but they both did it together relatively recently with around the same time as each other. So it made me realize, okay, they're still doing this, and people could be misled because the way they present it, you do have to have just a basic understanding of some of the differences between the Greek in each of those texts. We'll start with the Hebrew of Deuteronomy 6:4, which is what we were beginning to do yesterday. But we're going to start there real quickly here in a moment. And then we'll move right into the Greek because that's where they make the argument that in 1 Corinthians 8:6, the use of the Greek word Kyrios there for Jesus is the equivalent of Kyrios in the Septuagint of Deuteronomy 6:4. Okay, now I'm going to show you that's not the case, okay? As we all know, the Greek word for Lord can have multiple applications, but they try to make a specific, parallel with the way those texts are presented. I'm going to show there is no parallel in that actually, and this is why I decided to do it as part of this series, Bible and the Trinity in Conflict. There is a conflict. What Dr. White and Sam and other Trinitarians, again, this isn't new, but they both did it recently. They both keep doing it. Don't matter what you tell them. We know this, but we also have to then reinforce it among ourselves, make sure no one gets weakened by their lies, misrepresentation, all that stuff. Okay, so why do we say it's lies, misrepresentation? Well, I'm going to get right to it in a moment. There's a lot of reasons, but I realize that it's not just that. They're not just misrepresenting that alleged equation between those two texts, Deuteronomy 6:4 and 1 Corinthians 8:6, but these texts and related texts and the wording that they're pointing to actually disproves the Trinity. There's a conflict, right? That's why we have this series. This series is based on the conflict we see with the Trinity in the Bible. If you want to believe in the Trinity, go ahead. I don't have a problem with people who choose to believe in the Trinity. You can believe what you want about the Bible too. But we have some people who attack us because we don't believe in the Trinity, and they use certain arguments that are defective in ways where we're like, hey, that's dishonest. That's not appropriate. Now, we don't quite see Dr. White and Sam in the same light, but not everybody's the same. And the fact is, they are both lying in this case and or misrepresenting the text unintentionally, right, after all this time. I doubt it. But we know they both have a position to maintain, so whatever, right? Either way, I believe I'm not only going to show what they're saying is wrong, but there is no way, as I said yesterday, I'm going to set a high standard. I believe I'm going to show you conclusive proof that it's not possible. Okay, like I said a moment ago, the use of Lord, Kyrios in the Greek, can have more than one meaning or application, but it cannot mean or stand for the divine name in 1 Corinthians 8:6, and I'm going to prove that tonight. Yes, I am. So you need to stick around, right? It's right there. It's like right in front of all of us. But because, again, they make us look in certain directions, right? Misdirection. They want us to go in Trinity direction, right? We don't go Trinity, we go with the evidence, right? Best available reasons. And that doesn't give us Trinity. Not in an ontological sense like they want it to be. We do believe in the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. But the Holy Spirit's the Father's Spirit, just like we have a spirit. He gives his spirit to the Son, who has his own spirit, but he knows the Father's Spirit's greater, so he uses it when he becomes the one the Father appoints to do all the judging, right? All the resurrection, everything. He says he gets all things from the Father. So we're going to discuss it. I'm going to show that Lord cannot mean or stand for the divine name in 1 Corinthians 8:6 when applied to Jesus there. And I'm going to show that Sam and Dr. White and all these Trinitarians and others are wrong in assuming that the divine name was not used in the Greek translation of Deuteronomy 6:4 that the New Testament writers or any Christian or Bible-believing Jew could have used or would have used during and before the first century AD. Okay? That's not to say there weren't translations in Greek that could have used surrogates, right? We don't know. I'm going to explain why we don't know and how the best available evidence shows just the opposite. But when you look at the Septuagint, okay, we're talking about a Greek translation in the early 3rd century, allegedly, according to the most popular, somewhat legendary story related to the letter of Aristeas and other documents and ancient writings from that time and thereafter that describe things that in many ways are not believable. Okay? And I'm not going to get into it tonight because I'll do that in another show. I'm going to talk about the Bible and the canon more in like a month or so, but I've been doing that progressively, so I'll do it more. But tonight we're going to stick on Trinity, right? Deuteronomy 6:4, 1 Corinthians 8:6, Galatians 3:20, and mystery text, right? Surprise, right? We like surprises as long as they're good, right? We don't want a bad surprise. I give Sam, never mind. Okay. So it's not impossible that regardless of whether we can put confidence in, and we really can't, not to base an argument from that the letter of Aristeas and the most popular beliefs around the history of the Septuagint, but by which we would then mean the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, that were translated for the Ptolemaic Kingdom and Library in Alexandria. So for people who weren't Jewish, right? There were Jews in Alexandria, but they would have been, Egyptian, right? They would have been Greek. They would have, if they were like Philo in the 1st century, BC to AD, they would have learned at the schools and understood, especially in his case, right, philosophical systems, Middle Platonism. So they don't believe, as I've shown before, and I'm going to show again tonight briefly, because I have a whole section in multiple editions of my most popular writing, Jehovah's Witnesses Defended. And you can just consider that Christian Witnesses of Jah Defended, because the most recent edition doesn't get into things related to the Watchtower to have to defend them. Prior editions do, and most of it I think is still true, but I still believe the same things relative to God, Jesus, and you and me, and other things like salvation and why we believe what we believe. So, is it impossible that the so-called official first translation, even if we accept the basic descriptions in the letter of Aristeas, was done in a way that didn't use the divine name in a way that would have been a problem for Middle Platonists? Yeah, it's possible. They weren't translating it for people who understood and appreciated God's name. And as we saw, that later became the problem. Now, and with these same Middle Platonists, but earlier on, right? We're in the early 3rd century, and we're talking about the official story of the Septuagint. So we'll just go with it for a moment and say, okay, that's possible. But right before that, 100 years or so before that, you had the Jews at Elephantine using Yaho all over the place in correspondence with Jerusalem. And if the letter of Aristeas in the Septuagint tradition is true, then the Jews came from Jerusalem and brought texts that they translated. Whether or not they use the divine name from those texts, we don't know. So see, we don't have information about this original Septuagint's use of the divine name. It's not available. We don't know. Okay, but we do have people later on, right? So if that's early 3rd century when the Septuagint was first officially done, potentially, we don't know again if that's true. What we do know is, I'm going to get into more in a moment, is what we have later on, namely documents, text of the Septuagint, again, probably within 200 to 300 years of the official quote-unquote translation of the Septuagint, that show 100% the divine name. Okay? So, when it comes to our position, as I'm going to show you the text, I'm going to give you the details, everything. And we don't have a lot. It's not like we have a ton of Septuagint Greek translation texts dated to the 1st century AD and earlier, right? And if we take the early 300s for when the Septuagint was done, or late, I should say early 200, right, around 280. Okay, so we're talking about maybe 100 to 200 years between when that was done and when we have datable texts of the Septuagint, all of which have the divine name, where the divine name should be. None of which contain a text of the divine name and don't use it. And yet we have people like Dr. White and Sam. I've been talking about this for 30 years, in print, in debate, everywhere. So this is not really, is it excusable? Well, you tell me, right? Why do people not believe the things we tell them? So let's see here. Let's see if I can get that. I do need to let me try to do this. I wonder if I should do that. Excuse me 1 second. I do need to grab, there's a code. I need to sign in so I can show you guys this tract I did about the divine name, everything I'm talking about right now. This will only take a second. Don't worry. Hang on. See, that wasn't that bad. But I had to get something. A little bit related to still the new setup, but again, not a big deal. This is minor. Just had one thing in the other room. It's all working. It's coming together. All right, so I'm going to show this to you in a moment. And so let's go ahead and Let's take a look at Deuteronomy 6:4. Let's go ahead and do that. And do I have the Bible Hub up? Do I need to bring it? I thought I did. I do. Okay. So let's bring you guys up. Good to see you all. Czar, Rani Kalakalar, True Glue, Shannon, NZ Brandon, Betsy, nice. Czar, Morning Sun. Very nice. Okay, so let me bring you guys up to the Bible Hub. Deuteronomy 6:4, let's start. Let me show you first what the Hebrew of Deuteronomy 6:4 says. So then from there, we'll go to the Greek, which is really where the main issue is for the Trinitarians. So it's going to be, let's just do it with no camera, right? You don't need to see me right now. So here's Deuteronomy. Let's go to verse 4. This verse is often referred to as the Shema because the first word is Shema, which means to hear or listen, right? And so you can see here, we don't need to get too technical really because it's fairly easy to see what's here and what's in the Greek. I don't think it's going to require you to know very much, just basic grammar. So the rest can be explained, so we'll do that here, right? So hear Israel. And what does it want us to hear? It says Yahweh. The vowel pointing says Yahweh. I believe the original pronunciation was Yaol. I'm not going to get into that further here. I've done it before, and of course I'll do so again where necessary. But I'll either say what it says or say what I think it should read. So Yaol, our God. Yaol, one. Echad. You can see here that the word is, which we use pretty much in all of our English translations because it's just grammatically correct how we talk. We don't say Yaol, our God, Yaol, one, right? They did though, okay? So in Hebrew, they did not always express the verb is. Very commonly is omitted. And it's a big issue, of course, also in relation to texts like Psalm 45, but that's another subject that I've already talked about. Either way, it's similar, right? It's just one of those cases where the verb is not expressed. So what does that mean? Well, in this case, what are our options? Yaol, our God, Yaol, one. Let's just leave is out for a second, okay? Yaol, our God, Yaol, one. Well, the options are either what it is showing us, Yaol is one, or Yaol, our God, one Yaol, right? I don't think that's really even that's not how I would read it, right? But we don't have a verb, and Hebrew's different, so let's just say it's in the range of possibility. I don't believe that's how it should be. But it's either Yaol, our God, Yaol is one, or Yaol, our God, one Yaol. Yaol, our God is one Yaol, right? We could maybe put the is before that. Yaol, our God is one Yaol, okay? So we put the is up here and one before. We basically just switch these two. Put this after this. Yaol, our God, is one Yaol. Okay? Now, that's not how translations really ever render it. But it's, again, we're trying to give as, the most viable options here until we come to the right conclusion. So, we don't have the verb expressed, and it could be conceivably Yaol, our God, Yaol is one, or Yaol, our God, is one Yaol. What's the difference between that? Okay, let me give you an example, two, in fact, because this is probably going to be the heaviest grammatical portion of this. These two texts are going to help you understand the difference between what I just said in terms of the options of Deuteronomy 6:4. Think of these two verses. John 1:1. The word was theos. Okay? We'll just say God or a God. Now, think of, well, you could think of either Isaiah 9:6, or we'll just go with Titus 2:13. To me, meaning-wise, they would be almost the same, especially if applied to Jesus. But I don't think Titus 2:13 does. I've argued, I think, extensively and sufficiently for that. But I'm not against it. Okay, this is the whole problem, which ultimately ends up disproving their doctrine if you give it to them. But either way, let's just say in Titus 2:13, it's like Isaiah 9:6, calling the child who will be born mighty God, but it calls him the great God. Okay? Let's just say we have Jesus. Let's say the Word was God and the great God. Okay? This is what you have basically going on here in Deuteronomy 6:4, right? You wouldn't necessarily have to have the verb is before one Ya'ol to be equivalent to Titus 2:13. But just think of what that is. So if I say Jesus was a God, a divine being, or God in the beginning, I'm describing him, right? If I say the Word was a God in the beginning with God, when I say the Word was a God, the Word, like halagos, that's who we're talking about, right? The subject. Something's being said about the Word, which I believe is the firstborn Son of God, right? He's given that name in Revelation, and that's what it is. He's not an impersonal abstraction there. He's not God's words. No. They are confused there and get it wrong all the time. Either way, halagos. That's the subject, right? We say the Word was a God or a divine being. When we say, well, of course, it's a little bit different, right? Because it's theos ein in Greek. The theos comes before halagos. But it's not a question of priority of order here. With theos ein it is, but with halagos, we all agree that's the subject, okay? That's not an issue. So we're talking about the Word. And we'll just set aside whether or not the Word is this word or a title of an actual personal Son of God. Well, that's not necessary here to illustrate the difference between the two meanings I just told you here, which are critical, right? Is this Ya'ol our God is one Ya'ol? That meaning, what would that mean? That would mean there's just one of him, right? He could be a Trinity then. Because if there's just one Ya'ol, but he's three persons, like a triamese, three-headed human being, right? I want to say twin because we're used to Siamese twin, but it would have to be three-headed for the Trinity. We've talked about it as a model, at least in terms of sharing the same nature in three persons, right? Not separate beings. Okay, so when we talk like that, if we say Ya'ol, our God, is one Ya'ol, he could still be a Trinity, I guess. It's not in the Bible, but one Ya'ol, three persons, right? But that's not how it's usually translated and or how I think it should be translated and or how the Greek translates it, which is the whole issue related to their confusion over Kyrios in 1 Corinthians 8 and Deuteronomy 6 Septuagint. So right here, look, Yahweh God is one Ya'ol. Possible Trinity there if it's taught elsewhere, and that's how we understand Ya'ol. There's one Ya'ol. But if we go with the normal rendering and the rendering that's consistent with the Septuagint that's a part of their whole argument, then we have what this actually says. Ya'ol our God, Ya'ol is one. Okay. Now, if we were saying Ya'ol our God is one Ya'ol, that's like a Titus 2:13 great God, right? Because great, it would be the equivalent in this analogy of one. It's a description of the noun. In Titus 2:13, great describes God. In Deuteronomy 6:4, in the translation we're using, Yahweh our God is one Ya'ol. One describes Ya'ol. He's one. is one Yahweh, I should say in this analogy, right? I don't want to confuse you, but remember, Titus 2:13, the great God. Even if you don't think of it as Jesus, I'm going to use it anyway, because they do. John 1:1, the Word was God, right? So you're saying something about the Word existentially, how he existed. In this case, in the past, when? In the beginning. That's why we have this verb. And it's a little bit different. We're still saying something about the Word, right? Just like we are if we apply it to Jesus in Titus 2:13, right? The great God, Jesus Christ. In both John 1:1 in a Trinitarian sense, and Titus 2:13, something is being said about Jesus. It's not a question. It doesn't matter if he's a man or that's not the point. It's about Jesus in their view. In Titus 2:13, great modifies the word noun. He's a great God, right? Just like in Isaiah 9:6, right? Gebor modifies God. It tells you what kind of God he is. He's a great God. We'll talk about how many gods there are another time. They blow that so badly, and I've already talked about it, but it gets worse for them. Either way, let's stay on subject. Okay? So, in Titus 2:13, great is modifying God. In John 1:1, God is describing the Word. Theos, a God, however you want to see it. It doesn't matter in this case. Okay? Existentially in the beginning. So it's called a predicate description. It's used with a verb like is or was to describe the existence. The word was something. The word is something. Yahweh, our God, is something. So that's predicate, right? That's like John 1:1. The word was theos. Yahweh is one. In the predicate description, which is most common for Deuteronomy 6:4, Yahweh, the Lord, is one. One is not modifying Lord, like great is in Titus 2:13 for God. No, it's describing Yahweh the way Theos does the word in John 1:1. Okay? Those are the two differences you're looking at right here. The text actually gives us a predicate description, right? Yahweh is something. Verb's not there, so they supply it. What is he? He is one. That means what? That he's not two. He's not three. He's just one. He's one. Yahweh, our God, is one. Not Yahweh, our God, is one Yahweh. That's true too, but that's just not likely what it says, nor what the Septuagint says. We'll get to it in a moment. Either way, though, they're both describing Yahweh, either as one or saying there's just one. If we take this in the Hebrew or the Greek to mean this, exactly what it says right there, not with Yahweh, our God, is one Yahweh, but with how it says here, Yahweh, our God, Yahweh is one. He can't be a Trinity. It's saying he is one. This is the best opportunity I can think of for telling me or anybody how many he is, right? It's literally saying that. It's what this whole part of this verse is about. How many is he? What do they say? The one in the many. The one in the many. What do you mean? Are you quoting the Bible? You mean the one in the many sons of God? There's not one in many in God. This whole plural, it just shows how stupid you guys are. Okay? Yahweh is one. Right there. Unless you're going to argue that this should be Yahweh our God is one Yahweh. And you're going to be in a difficult position doing that. The worst. Is it possible? Well, yeah, well, that's about all you guys have at this point. But if you stay with this, it's over. This is non-Trinitarianism. This is unipersonism. It's one God the Fatherism. And that's the only thing it can. What else could it be talking about? You guys say the one and the many. No, it's just the one. There is no many in the one. That's just you guys providing false analogies and no biblical evidence again. No. See right here? There's just one in Yaho. Yaho is one. He is one. He's not two. He's not three. He's not, no. One. Again, unless you're going to adopt the worst possible position. Now, let's just say for the sake of argument that, either way, however we translate this text into the Greek, we're going to go to it next. But as you can see, it's either Yaho is one or Yaho our God is one Yaho. The way it is here and the way it typically is read is absolutely against the Trinity. It tells us how many is Yaho. He's one. So there is no many. The explicit teaching is he's one. Okay, so the one and the many, the only part of that that's true is the one. That's it. Unless you mean many gods and many lords, like we read in 1 Corinthians 8:5. We'll get to in a moment. Or sons of God who were with God in the beginning, just like the Word was with God in the beginning. And says it doesn't break Scripture to be called theos. Just like the other sons of God were called theoi. Oh boy. What now? Well, I guess you'll just have to ignore everything again. And we'll have to continue to present it. Now, if you look also, of course, the Trinitarians like to point out that this word here, echad, one, doesn't always mean like only one person. They'll point to earlier in Genesis where it says that the two, man and woman, will become one flesh. Okay, it says two, so it's explicitly identifying more than one. And it says they'll become one flesh, which does not ever mean that they're not two separate individual beings. So no, echad does not ever mean a multi-personal being. Unless you're going to talk about the beings in vision and Ezekiel, only one of which is human, and the other animals. So no, you don't have it. It doesn't exist. There is no analogy. It's false. It's fake God. It's false God. It's Sam's God. That should be enough to warn most people. Either way, don't let them fool you when they misuse not only how many is Yaho. He's one. He's not one in many. There's no many. There's just one with Yaho. Echad never means many persons in one being. It is used of more than one being for a figurative reference that still requires them to be more than one being. So just keep those things in mind. Now, let's get to the Greek, right? Because this is really where the Trinitarians try to connect the Greek of 1 Corinthians 8:6 with Deuteronomy 6:4. But it's important, I think, as I'm sure you can agree, that we understand what's going on here. What are our options and what is this saying? Yaho our God is one Yaho, or what it actually says with the verb expressed here. Yaho our God, Yaho is one. So I believe that the actual most consistent translation and likely me in the text is as you see here, and requires a non-Trinity understanding of Yaho. There is no other way to understand it in relation to how the text is speaking of Yaho. You could try to argue that again, it says Yaho our God is one Yaho, but I think that's the worst possible position to argue for grammatically and as a translation. You go ahead though, knock yourselves out. We'll see what you come up with. It won't change anything in terms of your failure in the Greek, but there is there's, we got to at least recognize where things can go in the Hebrew since the verb is not expressed. All right? And don't let them fool you on a cod. They blow that all the time. I talked about it. I forget which video. I'll try to link it below. It should be in my Trinity series, though, earlier in this series. Just check the titles. All right. Let's look at the Greek. So I think we're good here. This most likely is just absolutely anti-Trinitarian on its face, unless you're going to argue for a radical reorganization of this last part in a way that makes it attributive, right? One Yahol, like the great God, versus predicate. Yahol is one. The word was theos, or theos was the word. It's the same thing. It's predicate. Those are the two ways. They're both, though, don't let them fool you with this whole predicate attributive difference. They're just using word magic again. Yes, they are different. I just explained how they're different. But in both, whether it's Titus 2:13 and John 1:1, or the two different ways I just explained you could understand the Hebrew of Deuteronomy 6:4, they're both saying something about the subject, right? One is just doing so existentially, either in the past, present, or future, usually, and the other is doing so by modifying the noun that's applied to the subject, right? So whether it's great applying to God, or mighty applying to God, or any other term that modifies the noun God, only begotten God, okay, that's not predicate. That's an attributive. That's a description. That's an adjective modifying the noun. God, right? Only, what kind of God? Only begotten God. It doesn't say he is the only begotten God. That's a predicate, right? You're saying something about his present existence. He is this God. He's this particular God. In both instances, whether it's predicate or attributive use of a noun, that does not change it into an adjective. Okay, that's ridiculous. They're just seizing on the qualities of a noun and saying, I'll forget everything else. Oh, no, because it's actually a noun, not an adjective. And there's more. There is something else. So, yes, the qualities are always there. It's a noun. It has qualities. Good for you. He's an instance of that thing. Right. He's a God who was with God in the beginning. That doesn't break Scripture. He tells you that explicitly in that very edition of his history, John. So we all know where this goes and what they ignore and they don't want to listen to. They want their tradition, paganism. All right, let's go to the Greek. Let's go to the Greek. Let me bring you guys back up here. Let me check actually real quick. I'm getting the hang of it again. I'm feeling it. I'm starting to feel like, now the lighting again, I said earlier, I was able to get most of the issues resolved. I haven't been doing this regularly. I have a new setup, so it caused me a few problems yesterday. I apologize. I did leave it up though. It has some information. But it started giving me problems right when I got to this Deuteronomy 6:4 part we just finished. So I'll leave that up, but I'm still working on my setup. Hopefully it's good enough. It's more important that you understand the information, okay? So pay attention. We're going to get into some really great stuff. That was important to start with. You need to understand where this whole Deuteronomy 6:4 thing stands, right? Understand why that verse says what it says and what it could mean. So now, let's go ahead and, let me see. All right, let's take a look at the Greek. Yes, that's what we're going to do. You guys are doing good there. I got you right here. So let's take a look at the Greek of Deuteronomy 6:4 right here. Right? They don't really have it in an interlinear mode here, but don't worry. It's basically what you also saw in my thumbnail. Right? So here you can see, now we're getting into the Greek. I'll show you the whole context more, but we're now at this first part here. I put Yahol, the divine name, my version of it. It says in the Greek text that we do have of Deuteronomy 6:4, which are after the first century, okay? The majority of texts and the significant codices of the Old Testament that we have in Greek are from several centuries after the first century of AD, the New Testament era, okay? They're from like the 4th, 5th century. We have some fragments that are earlier, but not like whole texts. And the majority, again, is from the 4th, 5th centuries in terms of the collection, the vast majority of our Septuagint texts, Greek translation texts. Okay? So those do say Lord. Now, they don't usually say Lord in like a fully written out form. It's an abbreviated form called the nomina sacra. It's got usually the first and last and sometimes intervening letters, an abbreviation of the term with a line over it. No one knows exactly what this means or why they wrote it that way. No one knows when this practice began, and the earliest evidence we have of it is from the 2nd century. In my own view, it appears to be a continuation of some earlier Jewish abbreviations, like a double or triple yod. We have some Paleo-Hebrew yods with lines through them. That's my personal view. Yeah, I have a whole section on the Nomina Sacra in my JWD 3rd edition that you can get online in print or by digital. It's loaded. We're going to look at it in a moment. In fact, I was looking at it the other day and it is loaded. If you don't have that and you haven't read the first chapter, which is really a whole book, you should do that. It will give you an amazing amount of information and also talk a lot about what we're going to get into in a moment, how things change with the divine name, where they changed. So this use of this abbreviation for the divine name, Lord usually, again, as I said, abbreviated with a line over it. We don't know where this began, and we don't know exactly when it began. But the evidence shows it began in the middle to late 2nd or 3rd century. I would say middle, late 2nd century. And I'm going to show you why and how that happened. But when it comes to the arguments Trinitarians present on this issue, they all always assume that Kyrios is the equivalent of the divine name in texts like 1 Corinthians 8:6 or Philippians 2:11, where it applies Lord to Jesus. And I'm going to show that can't possibly be the case in both those texts, but I'm going to focus on 1 Corinthians 8:6 tonight. And I'm going to show that they're incorrect in assuming the Greek Septuagint we're going to look at right now of Deuteronomy 6:4 used Kyrios. They're wrong in almost every way. Look, okay? So the typical Septuagint says Kyrios eis estin. Lord, one is. The Lord is one. Again, let me put it, most natural way to understand and translate that is the Lord is one. Okay? Anyone wants to take issue with that? Have at it. Now you can see that we have a couple other texts we're going to get to in a moment, but focus on that first one. That's what the Septuagint you're going to look at right now says. Okay, so here we are at the Bible Hub, Deuteronomy chapter 6. Just get a little drink here. I'm going to show you that same part I just showed you for my thumbnail. Deuteronomy 6:4. Well, here's the part that's on my thumbnail. Right. You can see right here. Here, Israel, Lord, the God of us, Lord one is. Kyrios, Hotheos, Hemon, Kyrios, Eis Estin. So, what Dr. White, Sam, and other Trinitarians are arguing is that this right here, this Greek translation of what we just reviewed in the Hebrew of Deuteronomy 6:4, is the equivalent of this bottom text right here from 1 Corinthians 8:6 that we're going to go to next. And after that, then we'll look at Galatians 3:20 and a mystery text. Mystery text. Surprise. People like surprises. Except Sam if it contradicts his doctrine. Okay, so look at the bottom. Look at how the words are positioned. You can see the difference, can you not? Even if you have no knowledge of Greek. You can see at the very top, you have the word Lord, Kyrios, Heis, one, and then the verb estin. Okay? Lord, one is. Lord, one he is. It's a third person. Singular verb. Form of a me. And below that from Galatians 3:20, it says, Theos, eis, estin. Exactly the same. Okay? We'll go to that in a little bit later. They're exactly the same except for the first word. In Deuteronomy 6:4 Septuagint, Kyrios, Lord. In Galatians 3:20, Theos. Okay. Now, if you look at the one below that from 1 Corinthians 8:6 that Sam, Dr. White, and other Trinitarians want us to say is basically the equivalent of Lord in Deuteronomy 6:4 at the top, notice that the word one, heis, is put before the word Lord, Kyrios. And then after that, you have a proper name, Jesus Christos. If you look at the top and the bottom Greek words, you can see they are not the same in several respects. First, the word for one is in a different position. In Deuteronomy 6:4 Septuagint, it follows the word for Lord. In 1 Corinthians 8:6, it precedes the word for Lord. In Deuteronomy 6:4 Septuagint, there is an expressed verb. Estin, is, he is. In 1 Corinthians 8:6, there is no verb expressed in the description of Jesus as Lord. That is why you're going to have a really difficult time claiming these two are saying the same thing. Because in 1 Corinthians 8:6, just in what we're looking at right here, well, we'll get to more, but just this, okay, just on its face, the words, the way, what it's saying is not the same. The first two are basically saying the same thing, but with different nouns. Lord is one, God is one. Those are saying the same things, but about different, using different nouns. Using different subject nouns. In the bottom one, it's saying, now of course in the larger context, which we'll go to now, 1 Corinthians 8:6, it's talking about hours, right? It's even more specific, but it's talking about there being one of these lords. Remember in Deuteronomy 6:4, I said there's two ways we can look at this. Yahweh our God is one Yahweh. He's one Yahweh. That would be similar to one Lord Jesus Christ. It's not saying it exactly the same, but the use of the word one, right? Yahweh is one Yahweh, has one modifying Yahweh. One Lord Jesus Christ has one modifying Lord. And then it's identified as Jesus Christ. So, but the most likely and common way to translate, and again, it's not even really close, but we try to be, give the options here, is that Deuteronomy 6:4, especially Septuagint with the express verb estin, right? It's the Hebrew that can give you, there's a couple options. In the Greek, as you can see right here, just go back to it briefly, there's no way they're the same. Deuteronomy 6:4 is saying, Lord, one is. I don't know a single person, including the Greek pagans, that's the Eastern Orthodox pagans, that's a little playful thing. They like it, they don't care. Well, maybe. Either way, no one's going to think this Deuteronomy 6:4 is saying anything other than the Lord is one. Okay, again, the Hebrew, a little bit more fluid because there's no express verb. But even there, we saw the Bible express the verb where it traditionally is, where most translations put it, Yahweh is one. Just like in the Greek Septuagint that it's translated, right? The Lord one is one. It's using it as a predicate. It's describing how he is existentially. He is one. Okay? That's why it can't be multi-personal if it's predicate. And attributive, if you're saying that it's modifying Lord here, right? Or Yaol in the Hebrew, again, that's pretty wild and you wouldn't be able to defend that. One Lord and Yaol, one Lord is. So again, I don't think anyone's going to stand me on there that you could say that's legitimate. But if you go with Yaol is one, or the Lord is one, that can only be a predicate description of how many Yaol, the Lord, is existentially. It's literally using a number, one. How many is he? He's one. It's existential. It's a predicate. It's not saying it's not saying there's one Yaol who could be more than one person. It's saying Yaol is one. Exactly like Galatians 3:20 is saying God is one. And guess what? In Galatians 3:20, the show we did our very first episode about in this series, and I've done all other shows about, there it is explicitly, as we're going to go to prove, showing that God is one person. How he can't be the mediator and he can't be the other party to the contract. And guess who the mediator is? Someone who's not the God who is one. It's like it's so clear, is it not? When you look right here, if you look, and we're going to go to these texts in context, but you just look at them together. The Lord is one. Okay, that's existentially a predicate describing him as one. He's not many. There is no one and the many in God. God one is, Galatians 3:20. That's saying existentially as a predicate, he's one. God is one. The Lord is one. Guess what? Old and New Testament agree. How many is God? One. Ha ha. It's over. Now, 1 Corinthians 8:6, no verb, right? No esteem. See that last word? It's no. Here we have like Titus 2:13, right? We have like, a term describing a noun. To us, there's one Lord. How many lords are there for us? There's one. Oh, but there's many lords. We're getting very close to the destruction of their position as a possible option. Did you catch why it's not possible for Lord in 1 Corinthians 8:6 to in any way be the equivalent of the divine name, like Lord in the Septuagint of Deuteronomy 6:4 or God of Galatians 3:20? If you didn't, let me show you. 1 Corinthians 8:6, it's over. This is the big one. Okay, this is going to show, this is when I said yesterday and today, I'm going to provide you proof. Not everything I've shown you so far, I think is good arguments and proof to some extent that they're not the same, right? Galatians 3:20 and Deuteronomy 6:4 Septuagint are the same grammatically. They're both saying God or the Lord is one, just like the Hebrew is likely saying about Yaol. Again, I explored the potential. It's a stretch, but again, I try to argue for them and see, okay, is this even a credible option, right? They always pick the worst options, by the way, kind of like evolutionists. Either way, 1 Corinthians 8:6, check this out. Are you ready for the proof that I believe will in your mind, when you see, and I explain it further, if you didn't catch it already, and it was subtle, so don't worry. When I show you what I'm about to show you, you're going to see There's no way Lord, one Lord in 1 Corinthians 8:6 could in any way be the divine name or the equivalent thereof. Okay, you ready? And then I'm going to show you more on the divine name. Check this out. Okay, how do we know? How do we know that one Lord, right here, this is what we kind of showed in part on the thumbnail. We'll get to this first part with God the Father in a moment. We'll kind of focus on Galatians 3:20 because Galatians 3:20 provides the proper grammatical parallel for Deuteronomy 6:4. Deuteronomy, 1 Corinthians 8:6, the preceding part to one Lord Jesus Christ also provides a parallel with one God the Father, like we talk about all the time. But we'll get to that, right? It was the Galatians 3:20 that really you needed to see in relation to Deuteronomy 6:4, so you understand what's going, where these aren't the same. You want the same? That's Galatians 3:20. You want the same in 1 Corinthians 8:6? It's the first part of 1 Corinthians 8:6, right? One God the Father, just like you have below, one Lord Jesus Christ. There's no verb here, right? See, they add the verb. This is just one God. And it's not saying God is one. It's not adding the verb in that way. It's saying there is one God. Okay, so there's no verb used at all. There's often verbs that aren't used in text, and you just have to determine how the noun is used in relation to the subject, right? Or the description is used in relation to the subject. Is there an attributive use? Is there a predicate use? Okay, so if a verb is to be expressed or is expressed, then you know there's probably a predicate use going on here. But whether you still express a verb, but not so in a predicative sense, like this one, then it's modifying this noun, right? How many gods are there to us? That's what this is answering. Do you all see that? Yet to us there is how many gods? How many? That's the answer to this question, is it not? How many gods? Yet to us there is one God, the Father, out of whom all things are, and we for him. We'll end with that. We'll come back to it. You'll see. Hang tight. This is the key part we're focused on now. And one Lord, right? To us. This governs the whole thing. So yet to us, there's this, one God the Father, and there's this, one Lord Jesus Christ. Again, no verb here. Okay? One governs Lord just like one governs God up here. It's not saying God is one. It's not saying the Lord is one, like Deuteronomy 6:4 and Galatians 3:20. It's saying there's one God, and it's saying there's one Lord to us. It's not even saying there's only one God or one Lord, like you're going to see. And this proves it, right? Proof right here. I'm pumped up. It's coming, right? So what's the proof? How do we know this right here, Kyrios? One Kyrios, right? We know kind of from this, right? Because they're not the same as the texts which tell us the God or Yahweh or the Lord is one, which relate to the use of the divine name in Deuteronomy 6:4 in the Hebrew text, and Septuagint, I'm going to argue in a moment, you'll see. So we already know there's differences here, right? The position of haste, the use of the express verb or not, and the difference between the predicate description and the attributive use of ace, one Lord. Okay, so we looked at those differences. Those are all pretty clear. There's really no reason at all to identify one Lord in 1 Corinthians 8:6 with the Lord is one in Deuteronomy 6:4 Septuagint, later Septuagint, as I'll show. Now, Trinitarians might still say, Dr. White, Sam, hey, that the one Lord, right? But again, that's not what Deuteronomy 6:4 says. What do you mean? They would have heard what? Because what they were told to hear was Yahweh is one. Or in your later Septuagints, the Lord is one. And the equivalent to that is Galatians 3:20, where God is one. In contrast to the mediator, who isn't considered part of the one God, who isn't considered multi-personal because God's only one, it says, in contrast to those who are a mediator and a party to the contract. In other words, he can't be all the parties. He's just one. And there's a mystery text, a special text that complements that text that really sums up every text. That's coming up next. But right now, look. What's the key? What's the evidence? What's the thing I want you to see that proves conclusively, in my view? You're going to agree with me right now. Are you ready? I'm going to show you right now, and you're going to say, oh, yeah. It can't possibly, Miss Sam. It cannot possibly. One Lord in 1 Corinthians 8:6? No. I think everybody, even Sam, might have to say, you know what? Game over. We were wrong. You want to see what that is? Right here. It's been there all along. Verse 5. Even if indeed there are those called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are gods many, and lords many. That's interesting. I thought Dr. White and Sam and others for a long time, right? Understatement. I thought they said one Lord in 1 Corinthians 8:6 for Jesus was the divine name. They would have all understood that to be the divine name. Even though these are Greeks he's writing to. But we can assume some Jews. My point is, look, it says there are many Kyrioi. Asen. Oh, the verb is expressed. There are. Okay. There are what? There is an existential statement being given to us right here. What exists? Many gods and many lords. There are many Kyrioi. But to us there's one God the Father and one Lord. It's using those terms as parallel references. In other words, yeah, there are many gods, but to us, one God the Father. That's our God. Yeah, there are many lords, but to us, one Lord Jesus Christ. Does that sound like he's paralleling Lord with the divine name from Deuteronomy 6:4? Or that he's paralleling it with the understanding of many lords? Listen to what we read in a standard lexical source, okay? Bauer, Arndt, Danker, and Gingrich, Greek English Lexicon, a source I've shared for many decades with Trinitarians, and again, they just continue to say things that are pretty wild. But I will hold it up to the camera here in a moment if you want to get a good look at it, or you can just look. I'm looking at page 578 under Kyrios on the right column near the bottom. It says this, listen, standard source, okay? In contrast to the one Kyrios of the Christians, there are theoi paloi and Kyrioi paloi, many gods and many lords. 1 Corinthians 8:5. We cannot say just what difference, if any, Paul makes here, these theoi and Kyrioi, unless we have here a Hendiades, the apostle, may imply that the Kyrioi are lower rank than the, than the Theoi. Lower rank than the Theoi. And then he says, on the many Theoi and lesser divinities, compare Maximus Tyre 11:5 AB. Theos heis panton bouleus, and then it has an abbreviation for, it looks like Kyrioi, pater, and then abbreviation for, I think, Kyrioi, Theoi poloi, Theu paides. Right, where it says, or he gives other, he refers to the saying of Pythagoras. So he referred to Maximus of Tyre using these gods as of higher rank than the lords, the Kyrioi. And then he refers, in Bauer and Gingrich, page 578, it refers to the saying of Pythagoras that humankind must tous theus daimonon. Let's see here. It's kind of small. And it's abbreviated. It looks like patemon equal honor the deities more than the divinities or demigods. The daimones. So right here, and it gives even other sources. He refers to Heraclitus, fragment 5, who divides the celestial realm into gods and heroes, right? Like heroes. So not exactly lords in that reference, the last one I just gave. But so right here in this standard source, okay? Bottom of this page. You guys want to do like a snippet or whatever? So there's one right there, and then another. A standard source or reference work, and writer Robert M. Grant, a patristic scholar who's written many books on patristics and patristic-related writings. This is The Gods and the One God, right? Edited by Wayne A. Meeks, but written by Robert M. Grant. And on page 48, he refers to this text, 1 Corinthians 8:5 and 6, and then he says, it is hard to tell what Paul means when he accepts, even for a moment, the existence of the many gods and many lords. Perhaps he carried over the so-called in his mind. In similar fashion, however, the Platonist rhetorician Maximus of Tyre, that was also cited in the Bauer-Gingrich lexicon, says there is one God, the King and Father of all. I read the Greek of this to you. And there are many gods, sons of God, co-rulers, synarchontes, means co-ruler, with God. According to Maximus, this is a doctrine universally accepted, that there are many gods, that there's one God, the Father of all, and many gods who are sons of God, which obviously would be a little bit different in the Bible in terms of other cultures' view of these beings, but it's similar. And he's writing to Greeks, okay? And he's not using the same language as Deuteronomy 6:4. That's the whole point. He's using language similar to Maximus of Tyre and to Pythagoras and other works that have this understanding and difference between gods and lords. He says, according to Maximus, this is a doctrine universally accepted, held by both Greeks and barbarians. Perhaps Paul had something like it in mind when he had his own affirmation, when he made his own affirmation. In his thought, we see Christian theology being worked out in relation to polytheistic idolatry, which Paul includes in lists of vices, etc. Okay, so again, this isn't like something I'm making up, that there's a difference here between the gods and lords and Therefore the one God, the Father, and one Lord Jesus Christ, in the context of God, many gods and many lords, which are expressly affirmed by Paul in that same verse in context, like we read, that is much more contextually associated with what I just read to you from standard lexical and written sources on these subjects about the culture and understanding of the times and how those would have been understood as God's superior and Lord's inferior in rank. And it clearly, in 1 Corinthians 8:6, cannot mean the divine name here by one Lord, because it is in direct association not with Deuteronomy 6:4, Dr. White or Sam. It's very obvious if you look at it, like it's on the thumbnail right there. Okay, so there's really no excuse for this. You not only have that, but in the very preceding verse, it says there are many Kyrioi. So that would mean, there's many Yaos. And so what? He's contrasting Jesus as the one Yao from Deuteronomy 6:4 with many Yaos, right? This is so stupid. That does not make sense at all, either in relation to Deuteronomy 6:4 or in any Old Testament sense, where there are these many Yaos, maybe like the many Baals, right? It's not even the same in that sense. So it's just way out of line in terms of the context, whereas what I just read to you from these sources provides you the more likely and appropriate context for the terms actually used. One God, gods, lords, Father. So that's the context of thought that the Greeks, both Greeks and barbarians, Grant said, Maximus said, would have had of this, that Paul's writing to. It would not have been the Shema Septuagint translation of Deuteronomy 6:4, especially given the fact that Paul doesn't even use those words or anything really even close to them, except for just the words for one and Lord, but in a totally different grammatical structure. And in a context where he's not even talking about Deuteronomy 6:4, but the many lords commonly understood in Greek and barbarian culture as inferior lords to the gods, of whom there is only one, being the Father, and of the lords that are inferior to the God, one Lord Jesus. And as we see throughout, he's inferior to his Father. He's given life by his Father, John 5:26, and he's given everything by the Father. Authority, power, he has to give it back to the Father. He's given knowledge by the Father. Everything comes from the Father, including his life. Father raised him from the dead, Galatians 1:1. Father's the one who gave him life, John 5:26. It's the Father, everybody. That's what the Son tried to tell you all. But you all keep defying what he says, you Trinitarians and others who defy what the Bible teaches, instead of teaching what it actually says, that there's one God the Father, but there are many gods. Just like there are the sons of God who existed with God. That does not break Scripture. Who told us that? Son of God. Used it in his own defense, John 10. That's what we use. That's what we mean. That's what we believe. We are Christian. Now, let me show you how to prove even further, before I get into the divine name issues, that this whole use of one Lord in 1 Corinthians 8:6 cannot possibly be the equivalent of the divine name or the equivalent of one God. Look at where else we see this terminology. 1 Timothy 2:5. Check this out. Paul once again says one, same word we've been reading, okay? And this is using it in the same way that 1 Corinthians 8:6 is using it, okay? It's not using it as a predicate saying God is one, like Galatians 3:20, or Lord is one, Deuteronomy 6:4 Septuagint. No, it's using it just like we just read in 1 Corinthians 8:6. It's saying one God, not God is one. So it's very much like what we're reading in 1 Corinthians 8:6 for God and Jesus grammatically, okay? Look. Gar is a term that's called the postpositive, so it's never put first. So just ignore it. Pretend it's not there, because this goes directly with this. And this is just One of those odd grammatical things. It's not in any way changing the direct association. You can see they add the words there is there. There is no express verb. One God. I believe it is properly understood in that sense, but just we have to be accurate. One God there is. And, that's what Kai, then Kai, and one mediator between God and men. The man Jesus Christ. Right here. You have something very similar, don't you? Tell me this isn't similar to 1 Corinthians 8:6. I'm going to prove it to you again. I'm going to show you both again. Look, right here. One God and one mediator. Right? What does 1 Corinthians 8:6 say? One God the Father, one Lord Jesus Christ. It's almost exactly the same, just different terms, right? And slightly different grammatically. But it's using God and mediator the same way in 1 Timothy 2:5 here as God and Lord in 1 Corinthians 8:6. Look, one God there is and one mediator. Now, how many gods are there? Well, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians 8:6, even though there are many, to us, how many are there? One, right? So that's different from Deuteronomy 6:4, which says, like Galatians 3:20, Yaho, God is one. That's not answering the question how many gods there are. It's answering the question, how many is God? He's one. There is no many pagans. When it says the Lord is one, it's not saying how many lords is there in the Septuagint of Deuteronomy 6:4, is it? No, it's saying how many the Lord is. One. In 1 Corinthians 8:6 and 1 Timothy 2:5, it's saying how many gods, how many lords, and how many mediators there are. How many? One. To us, right? Yeah, there are many gods, there are many lords, and there's actually many mediators. How many are there to us? One, right? Is that saying how many the mediator is? No. Is that saying how many the Lord is? No. Is that saying how many God is? No. If we're saying, like 1 Corinthians 8:6 and 1 Timothy 2:5 right here, there's one God and one mediator between that God and men, or like in 1 Corinthians 8:6, there's one God and there's one Lord, that's saying how many gods and lords there are to us and mediators. If I say God is one, Galatians 3:20, I'm saying what? Am I saying how many gods there are? No. I'm saying how many God is. It's a predicate. It's not an attributive relationship to God like Titus 2:13, the great God. And Trinitarians are all screwed up. Or they're just trying to confuse you. They don't confuse me at all, and I know they're screwed up. Deuteronomy 6:4, Septuagint, Lord is one. Is that saying how many lords there are? No, it isn't, is it? It's saying how many the Lord is. If I said the mediator is one, am I saying how many mediators there are? No. I'm saying how many the mediator is. Right? Right. That's what you need to remember. That is the difference between the Greek of Deuteronomy 6:4 and the Greek of 1 Corinthians 8:6. What's similar to Deuteronomy 6:4 in the Septuagint is Galatians 3:20, which we're going to go to now, just to show that this is talking about one person. This language that's exactly the same grammatically, but with different nouns, with Deuteronomy 6:4, it's talking about a person. However, a mediator of one, not he is. The mediator of one person, not he is. In other words, you don't have a mediator unless you have at least one person on this side and at least one person on that side, right? You got to have two people that you're mediating between. So, Galatians 3:20. The mediator of one person, not he is. He's not a mediator of one person. But God, one is, right? Right there. There's your Deuteronomy 6:4 grammatical parallel. How many is God? Well, you don't have a mediator if you just have one, right? It says that right here. The mediator isn't of one person. There has to be more than one person involved. How many is God, right? Not how many gods are there. Well, how many people is God? Because to have a mediator, you have to have more than one person. Oh, but, God one is expressed verb over. There's the predicate description. There's the proof. There's no Trinity in the Bible. God is one person, and he always has been, you pagans. Everything supports this conclusion. It's incredible what you people have done, and you should get away from these dragon teachings as fast as you can if you can. If you don't want to, fine, do what you have to. But stop blaspheming the God of the Bible, okay? We're sick of it. I'm going to show you else what we're sick of too in a moment. But this lie that 1 Corinthians 8:6 is parallel to Deuteronomy 6:4 when it's actually Galatians 3:20 that's the parallel to Deuteronomy 6:4 in the Septuagint. And they both show that the Lord Yaho, God, is one. Not that there's only one God or one Lord or one Yaho. That's grammatically what they're saying. There is one God, the Father, even though there are other gods. He's the superior one. He's to us, there's one. That's how we know there's only one. How many are there? How many gods? One. It's not telling us how many people God is, like Galatians 3:20, like Deuteronomy 6:4. No, 1 Corinthians 8:6 and 1 Timothy 2:5 are telling us how many gods there are to us. Guess what, everybody? One. It's not a Trinity either. You know who it is? Exactly. Father. The one they have been blaspheming. And the Son. They despise the firstborn Son and they lie about him just to feel better about their false doctrine. They have a fake Jesus, a fake God. And they've been lying about the God of the Bible for 2,000 years. You know what else they've been lying about the God of the Bible in regards to? His own name. And before I show you the great shame that these pagans have brought on themselves and everybody else, let me first just make sure you guys are doing okay, because I'm going to read to you this right here. And it's going to set up for you something that I'm going to talk about more in about a month or so when we get to, I'll answer some questions here in a few moments, so just hang tight. I forgot to mention that, but I will stick around for some questions. I'm going to be talking about the Bible in the can a little bit more in about a month or so in another video. I'm kind of busy right now, so I have to space it out. But I'm going to share this with you now. And this is going to be what I talk about a lot more in the next, let's see. The next video that I do. So I'm just going to introduce it here. I'm going to read it and then I'll show it to you. I'll put it up close so you can snip it or copy it, okay? This is from Siegfried Kreuser's book, The Bible in Greek, Translation, Transmission, and Theology of the Septuagint. It's 2015, Society of Biblical Literature, number 63. And I'm going to read from it to you. Just a small part. This will only take a second. Listen. Okay, this is what I'm going to talk about in terms of the canon issues that are going to be coming up in a month or two. But we're going to use this right now to get into the divine name and show how they're even assuming wrongly that Deuteronomy 6:4 in the Septuagint, as we primarily have it or haven't, is correct. And then they feel comfortable constantly claiming that the Septuagint translated the divine name by Kyrios, which they then try to use to promote their incorrect argument that Kyrios in 1 Corinthians 8:6 and elsewhere is the equivalent of divine name. We just showed that's not true, right? There's no way, because it's used in response to the many lords that aren't our lords. And those aren't Yahos, those are lords. Those are lower ranked deities like we just showed from the quoted sources, and as is clear from the context, because it's not talking about many Yahos. It's talking about many lords, but how there's only one to us. Even though there are many Yahos. No, many lords, you pagans. So they don't even get that right. Page 31 from Cruiser. A lot of you may not realize this, and this is why I'm going to talk about it a lot more in the next show I do, the CW Jah Praise Stream. Bible in the Canon Part 3. Listen to this. In the preface to Chronicles, in the Vulgate translation, Jerome makes a statement about the different text forms of the Greek text as it existed in his time. This statement became most influential in Septuagint research and reads as follows. Okay, now he gives the Latin. I'll hold it up so you can get that too. And the key part of the Latin reads, totusque orbis, looks like it's kind of small right, and I apologize, hac inter se trifaria varietate compugnat. I'll read the whole part, but that last part is going to be the last part of what I read to you right now that I just read to you in Latin. Here's what Jerome says in his preface to his Vulgate Latin translation of Chronicles from the Hebrew. Right? Remember, there were some other translations of Latin texts existing at the time, and Jerome was told to redo the Latin translation that at that point had been done from the Greek Septuagint, not the Hebrew. So Jerome does it from the Hebrew. And this is why, right here. He says, Alexandria and Egypt praise Hesychius as author of their Septuagint. He says, Alexandria and Egypt praise Hesychius. People aren't really sure who that is. As author of their Septuagint. This is Jerome writing in the late 4th century. Constantinople, though, through to Antioch, accepts the text of Lucian the Martyr, another version of the Septuagint. And in between those provinces, the Palestinian read codices that Origen had worked on. And Eusebius and Pamphilus have brought to wide reception what Origen worked on. And this is the part I read to you in Latin. And the whole world competes among itself with this threefold variation of the Septuagint. In the late 4th century, Jerome is writing about how the whole world, totusque orbis, is divided by these three versions of the Septuagint. This is in the 4th century. Now, I'm going to show you this. This was going on for a long time. There's a lot that was going on, some of which I don't think a lot of you know about and that isn't talked a lot about for reasons you're going to hear about when I talk about this next. But let me just share with you the part that I read to you so you can have it if you want it, including the Latin that he gives here from Jerome. I kind of marked a little bit, but it's right here where you can see the word I wrote, use. Try to get it so it's legible there. Is that legible? Anyway, that's what I read to you, okay? So if you want more, you can get it from there. But you can see here, this idea that this unified canon and use, right? He's talking about 3 different versions of the Septuagint that are dividing the whole world of the Christians. Okay? Which is why I believe he did a translation of the Hebrew text. He wanted to probably just try to resolve the differences that existed because of the different versions of the Septuagint. But why do we have all these different versions of the Septuagint? Okay, so now let me show you something I put together that will show you why Dr. White, Sam, and others who can continuously misrepresent the situation with the Septuagint and the divine name and the New Testament. Okay, this ties all in together. Look, this is what I put together that I think will help you. I'm also going to be putting a tract of this, a form of this in the YHWH website. I'll post it on the community section of the channel though. Let you know what's up when it is. So let's see. Let me make sure you guys can see this okay. So as you can see, I put together a little, I'll change this a little bit for the tract, and I'll do that probably by tomorrow. But for now, okay, this is a timeline and a listing of all the Septuagint, that is Greek translation of the Old Testament texts, that were available to quote during the 1st century and earlier. Okay? So if you were a New Testament Christian or Jew, or someone in the 1st century, a Jewish Bible believer, according to the actual evidence, okay? The actual evidence we have, which I'm showing you right here, and I show in my JWD editions that I've shown for decades, all available Greek Septuagint related Greek translation biblical texts, all of them that existed during the 1st century and earlier. And so if they're earlier, they would have still been existing during the 1st century because they're still here today. Every one of them that contain, that preserve a biblical text where the divine name would be, according to the Hebrew, every single one of them, which I'm going to show you, contain the full form of God's name. Not Kyrios in its full form, not Kyrios in its abbreviated form, nomina sacra, and not anything else. This is what they contain right here. Divine name containing Old Testament Greek texts in the 1st century AD. So these would have existed and been in the 1st century. Here, the very first one is dated from 200 to 100 BC. It has the full form of the divine name, YHWH, which I believe was still pronounced Yaho. I believe, like Josephus even says, of the 4 vowels that were on the high priest headdress, the high priest crown. There are 4 vowels. Now, we know it has 3 letters, right? YHWH, but it has 2 uses of hey in the full form, the tetragrammaton. People usually accept that yod and wah were vowel letters originally, and that hey came to be a vowel letter. Everyone agrees with that. I believe it was a vowel letter all the way back, which I can show using the Elephantine Papyri, where it has yod hey hey or yod hey wah, and other instances where hey is used as a vowel marker, and the fact that it's used here with the divine name in a way that would allow people to see how to pronounce that final vowel, right? Because it would get complicated at times over such a long period with different dialects. But look, right? So this little part right here, right? I'll put a red circle over it, but it's to the right. This little kind of, you can see where my cursor is. It doesn't look like the rest of the letters. You can see it's been written in. You can kind of see the hey. The papyrus is kind of beaten up. It's PFWAD 266b or Gottagen 848. Those are the technical references. But you can see the divine name right there. an Aramaic script in and among the Greek characters. Okay? And you even have a punctuation dot right there. Right? And this is a 200 to 100 BC text. So that is a possibility that the New Testament writers, if they were quoting from the Septuagint, that is an option. You could say textually, we have texts that are available showing the Septuagint Greek translation with an Aramaic form of God's name right here. So that's an option. Next, dated from 100 to 30 BC. 4Q Leviticus B, or Gottagen 802. Right here, kind of on the middle line. Again, I'll put red circles around these. I should have done that. For the track, though, I'll put red circles around them. You can see what kind of looks like these two ends here in the middle of the middle line. Right next to that, there's a space. And then you can see the letters, what look like an I, an A, and an O. Okay, we know that's Yaho. It's one of at least two that are used in this papyrus, because this is the exact text of Scripture translated into Greek where the divine name is in Hebrew. Okay, and there it is right there, transliterated into Greek vowels. Yaho. Right there in a biblical Septuagint text. Okay, so people reading the Greek Septuagint in the first century and as early as the first century BCE, like for several hundred years at least, they all would have been reading Greek translations at this point, what I'm showing you, with the divine name in Aramaic or in Greek, pronounceable, like Yaho. They would have been able to see, oh yeah, like Diodorus, the Greek historian, from the first century BCE, in his library of history, as I pointed out repeatedly, and in my writings and videos, he himself says that the Jews pronounced the name of the God of Moses, Yaho. Oh, and guess what? It just happens to be in a Jewish Greek translation of the Hebrew text, Old Testament, right there. Next, 8 HEV 12 GR 943 Gottagen, the Nahal Hever text. Right? This is, as I'll discuss further in my next video on the canon issues, this is supposed to represent, the Kaige recension of the Septuagint that uses that expression, and also has what they call sometimes a Hebraizing element, where it tries to be more like the Hebrew text, and they speculate at times how this could be, why we have these different versions of the Greek translations, and some could be competing with the official translation and or just different texts that are trying to go back to a more literal translation, which you'll see comes up with Origin in a moment, versus those who may be like Philo, right? Or with potentially the official Septuagint related to the Aristeas letter and tradition, where they, because of their Middle Platonism, as you're going to see in a moment, they don't believe God has a name or should have a name, and that it should be concealed. They actually say that. You're going to see it. I've already talked about it. People lie about it. So people think maybe that's part why. But the fact is, there are no Septuagint texts dated to the first century or earlier that would show any kind of non-divine name competing text. Again, as I speculated earlier, which could be the case because of the Middle Platonist Jews, yes, it is possible. So it's not out of line, even though we don't actually have any text evidence for a Septuagint first century or earlier with no divine name. It doesn't exist. Okay? They've been lying to you. Sorry, talked too long without a drink. All right, back to this though. This is the third one. So this is the first one. Right there, P4 266b, full tetragrammaton, which I still believe is pronounced Yaho. And then we have an actual Septuagint text with the Greek transliteration and I believe, pronunciation Yaho. because that's how they were pronouncing it, just like Diodorus said. So whether they were writing it in Paleo-Hebrew, Aramaic with 3 or 4 letters, doesn't matter. They all meant and pronounced the same thing, Ya'ol. I believe evidence shows that, and that the 4th letter, the final hey, in the Tetragrammaton is really just a vowel marker for some to make it clear how to pronounce the final sound. Or potentially with the wa is more of a wo, right? Ya'wo. And the H being an actual final vowel sound, not a vowel marker. For the sound to be conveyed with the wa, which I see more as the omega. But with Greek, especially at this time with these texts, right, dated, we don't have things like a digamma, right? Not many people know about digammas, but that's it's not used in New Testament or Septuagint Greek, but it's very ancient Greek, and it's more like the Hebrew wa, right, which relates, there's a lot going on here, I'll talk about it more, but relates ultimately to the association with the Greek alphabet and the Phoenician alphabet, and how all these languages really come from the same places, we know if you've read the Bible, right? So the first one, P-Fwa 266b, 200 BCE, available in the 1st century, Ya'ol. Second one, 4Q Leviticus B, 100 to 30 BCE, available in the 1st century, Ya'ol. 50 BC to 50 CE, Nachal Hever. You have 2 hands here as well. I should point that out, right? That's why there's 2. You have the top one here. You see this kind of archaic Hebrew on the far right. This bottom part here, it's a little different than these other letters, these Greek letters here on the top. And then down the bottom, this far right here, you can see that different script there. This is Paleo-Hebrew. That's the divine name right there. This is the minor prophet scroll, right? Like so Zechariah, Habakkuk, minor prophet scroll. In one of those texts of the minor prophets, you have this form on the top. Okay? There's the Paleo-Hebrew form of the divine name right there in the Greek Septuagint. Below that, from the same Nachal Hever scroll, but a different hand, a different section, you can see the Greek text pretty clearly there, but you can see also those 2 instances of totally different 4 letters, right? You can see on the bottom really clearly. That's the divine name again, right there in the Hebrew text. I'm sorry, right there in the Greek text. Translation of the Hebrew, okay? Septuagint, we call it all. Although it could be a little bit different in terms of the official Septuagint and these other versions, but the fact is, we lump them all together for convenience. Okay, the final text we have, okay? This is it. This is all of the text evidence of the Septuagint, dated to the 1st century and before, so available to the New Testament writers and Jews who would use the divine name, unlike Middle Platonists like Philo. Every text we have of those documents that was available that contains a portion of the Hebrew text that has the divine name translated into Greek, or the text that surrounds the divine name translated into Greek, uses the divine name in Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek. No substitute. None. Okay? So this is the final one. P-Oxy 3522. Literally dated to the 1st century. I put CE, but I probably should put AD. All right, they both refer to the same thing. Here you can see, look over to the left. I'm going to make a tract for you guys that'll have all of this information. All you have to do is download it, email it, share it to anybody. You can see pretty clearly. Look at that box on the bottom left, right? It's a little bit less clear than the one above it, but you can see the Greek text flowing, line 1, line 2, right? Line 3, line 4. Look at the far right of line 4. You see that? You see those lines right through those characters? Those 4 letters right here, that's Paleo-Hebrew. Again, showing the divine name. Not Lord. Not Anamana Sacra. Every single text datable to the 1st century and before of the Septuagint or Greek translation from the Hebrew that preserves a portion of the translated Hebrew text in Greek where the divine name should be and is in Hebrew, is also used in Greek. That's why I say if we're going to argue based on the available evidence to the New Testament writers in the first century, we have to conclude that they quoted from a Septuagint text that had the divine name. Why? There is no other one. Yeah, it's possible maybe we'll find one that doesn't have one. Probably be Middle Platonist, if anything, because it's not accurate. How do we know it's not accurate? Well, we know what the Hebrew says, right? Has the divine name. The Hebrew texts don't use a surrogate for the divine name in these translated Greek Septuagint texts. Also, look at this, okay? As I pointed out in my JWD editions, this is on page 72 of my third edition. You can get this for $15 or so at my audiobook site. This is where I get into Albert Pietersma's discussion of the Septuagint and, whether or not the original Septuagint contained the divine name. For me, that's not really the issue, right? The issue is whether or not the divine name was used in the texts that were available to the New Testament writers and whether or not they used it. Okay, well, Origen, writing in the late 2nd, early 3rd century, right, he compiled the Hexapla. He's one of our best authorities, right? As you heard read from Jerome earlier, his version of the Septuagint was one of the 3 that was dividing the whole world and was the one used in Palestine. I'll get into that more in my next part on the canon. But look, in this part here in my JWD 3rd edition, I talk about how Pietersma quotes Origen as saying, in the more accurate exemplars of the Septuagint, the divine name is written in Hebrew characters. Right? And I sourced all this out. I didn't want to bring up all the different, because I've been doing this a long time. I've been presenting this to people a long time. I didn't want to go into every single, like go to Origen here and then go to Migni here and the Greek text here. I put that right here. Right? And you can look at Pietersma's article or look up Origen or Migni yourself. But when Origen says the more accurate copies of the Septuagint, he uses the words tois akribesterois. That means the more accurate. Okay? The more accurate copies of the Greek translation of the Hebrew. Like we just showed you. Origen in the late 2nd, early 3rd century says the more accurate Septuagint copies have the divine name in Hebrew characters. Okay? He also knew about the form of the divine name Yaol, but he's talking about the Hebrew characters here when he refers to the more accurate text. So obviously he doesn't have in mind 4Q Leviticus B from the 1st century BCE, which is still there. It's still here today. But the ones he's seen are more like these ones, right? They're more like these ones here with the Paleo-Hebrew. Right? That's Aramaic, so he's not talking about Pifwad. He's talking about texts like right here. 8 HAV 12 GR 943, right? Nachal Hever. The top one. That's Paleo-Hebrew. Or right here, Pioxy 3522. So Origen, several hundred years after this, or, at least a couple. If we take this from the 1st century, these are all dated before, this one too. But if we go from the 1st century, the New Testament writers, they all have these divine name containing Septuagints. And then we go to Origen, late 2nd, right? Like, late 100s, early 200s. He says that's still the case. Okay? So we have evidence and testimony from credible textual critics, Origen of all people. And we have actual text themselves of the Septuagint. I just showed them to you. From 200 BCE to early 200s, 3rd century CE, showing us and telling us that the more accurate, in the case of Origen, or the available, in the case of what I showed you, Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible have the divine name, either from what Origen observed in Old Hebrew, or from what we have actual evidence of, like I've been showing you, in Aramaic, in Greek, and in Paleo-Hebrew forms. Okay? So on the track I'm going to present later, the available evidence shows that that Old Testament Greek text during the 1st century AD contained the divine name. If New Testament writers, I should put an S there, huh? I'll put this up later on the site. If New Testament writers quoted these available Greek Old Testament texts, they would have used the divine name in Paleo-Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek. Jewish and early Christian Middle Platonists like Philo of Alexandria, Justin Martyr, or Clement of Alexandria all show awareness of the divine name, but refuse to use it due to their Platonic belief that God cannot have a name as an eternal being, which is not true according to the Bible. I talk about this all throughout my JWD edition, like the one I just cited for you, but I'm going to provide at least these 3 quotes in the pending track that I'll make available on the site for this issue. Philo of Alexandria, writing in the 1st century during the New Testament era, says he's a Platonic Alexandrian Jew. Okay, he's not like the Qumran Jews, right, or the New Testament Jews. He's a Middle Platonist. Look at what he says. No personal name even can be properly assigned to the truly existent, and names are symbols which indicate created beings, not imperishable natures. On Change of Names 11:14, and then also I should put here, then I also cite in De Deo 1:4, Philo writes, for he, God, is unnameable. These are not things you're going to find in the Bible. It's exactly the opposite, right? He names himself. We don't need a created being to name him. He names himself. So it's not by a created being. Philo doesn't follow the Bible in these ways. He follows Middle Platonism, even though he tries to combine the two, but his view is first toward Middle Platonism, and he tries to justify Judaism by using it. Okay, Justin Martyr, also Middle Platonist, but unlike Philo, Justin's a Christian, right? So you have 2 individuals within about 100 years of each other, both Middle Platonists, meaning they follow the beliefs of Plato and the theory of forms and these things about God not being nameable, Greek philosophical ideas that aren't presented in the Bible and that contradict it. You have 2 Middle Platonists, and they're both saying the same thing about God's name that's not according to the Bible. Justin, there's no name given to God. For by whatever name he be called, he has as his elder the person who gives him the name. Second Apology, A&F Volume 1, 190, 191. Justin, as I've shown before in my writings and elsewhere, he even quotes Diodorus of the 1st century BCE Greek historian, who uses the divine name Yaho, like I referenced earlier, in the very quote Justin makes of him. And then he just ignores it because he's a Middle Platonist. They all knew God's name. Many just chose not to use it. And if you think that's just some basic thing and they either used it or didn't, no. Look at this next Middle Platonist, Clement of Alexandria. He says the truly mystic word, respecting the unbegotten and his powers, ought to be concealed. And in the context, he's talking about the divine name, the Stromata, A&F, Volume 2, 463. Okay, I provide a lot more like that. All the way to Augustine of Hippo, right? From around Jerome's time. Who says the same thing, right? He says, in fact, if we go back to my JWD real quickly, there's a quote there that I think would be relevant here. I don't know if I might not be able to find it though. Let me see. Yeah, I think I can actually. Let's do this. Yeah, right here. So on page 93 of my JWD 3rd edition, the digital edition, that's the most current one. I note further on this point, after I discuss Philo and others who have this Middle Platonic view of God not having a name, all right, further, there's evidence even in the writings of Augustine of Hippo, 354 to 430, that Christians had by his time, which would also be Jerome's time, in some measure adopted an unbiblical understanding of certain texts. Augustine wrote the following paraphrase of Exodus 3:14 and 15. First tell them that I am he who is, so that he may learn the distinction between being and non-being, and also be taught that no name at all properly describes me. Right? So, I mean, it's out of control. And I give a lot more information and references here. You really should take a look at this section and other more detailed sections in my first chapter of JWD3 for more on this Platonic view, from Philo all the way through to at least Augustine of Hippo, but in others too, like Justin Martyr, Clement of Alexandria, even Origen and others are affected by this. So you have, like Jerome testified to, at some point, we go from what I showed you, right? This whole full use of the divine name in all these Septuagint texts during the first century. We go from that to sometime in the second century, both the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and the New Testament writings that quote them, sometime in the mid to late second century, I believe, possibly early third. But I see some correspondence with certain other abbreviations that start to become more well known in the second century. At some point in the second century, we get this replacement of the divine name in the Greek translations of the Old Testament from everything I just showed you, the Aramaic, Paleo-Hebrew, and Greek forms of God's name that are consistent with what everyone like Diodorus and others were saying. That's what the Jews said God's name was. We go from that sometime in the middle to late second century, early third, to substitutions. These abbreviations of terms like Lord, which is where Dr. White and Sam and others, Trinitarians, become confused and begin to think, oh, well, no, the New Testament writers must have been quoting this abbreviated form of Lord, these sacred special abbreviations, in copies of the Septuagint where they were already being replaced. The Jews, God's people, they started to replace God's name from what he originally gave them in the Hebrew. Yeah, they started to replace it, not because of Middle Platonism, but they just started replacing it, right? Or were they using Middle Platonism? Were they that influenced by it? And is that what you're saying? If so, that's possible, but all the evidence actually shows that Jews who weren't influenced by Middle Platonism used the divine name. And the Bible's not Middle Platonism, okay? And that's what we've been pointing out to you guys all this time. So we go from all these Septuagint texts having the divine name in the first century, and the New Testament writers quoting something. And the only thing they could have been quoting was the Hebrew text or the Greek text, both of which, according to the evidence, had the divine name. We go from that to the Septuagint texts themselves and the New Testament writings within about 100 or more years. That's a long time, by the way. Changing the divine name into a special abbreviation no one has seen before. No one talks about where it came from. And there's no text evidence it's from the first century or was used in the Septuagint of the first century or by the New Testament writers in the first century. We even have evidence going all the way to the late second century, like we quoted from Origen earlier, dealing with Pietersman, the original Septuagint. Late second century, early third, saying that in the most accurate copies of the Septuagint, the divine name's there in Old Hebrew. Okay, now I believe that statement shows that the change was happening. Right? He's making a distinction, is he not, when he says that, between the more accurate and the less accurate. Right? So we start to get different versions, including by Jews like Aquila, Theodotion, and Symmachus. Right? Some of them use abbreviations for the divine name. And then, of course, we get these nomina sacra in Christian versions of the Septuagint, later versions. Origen says the most accurate have the Old Hebrew. All the available Septuagint texts of the 1st century and earlier have Aramaic, Old Hebrew, or Greek. No abbreviations. No substitutions. And yet we get Sam, Dr. White, and all these Trinitarians trying to tell us that in 1 Corinthians 8:6, one Lord is the equivalent of Yaho, our God, is one Yaho. But in the Septuagint, which isn't the same as 1 Corinthians 8:6 grammatically, in several ways, and which, unlike Deuteronomy 6:4 in the Septuagint of later usage where that uses Kyrios and not the divine name like we showed in the other text we had, we don't have a text of the Septuagint of Deuteronomy 6:4, so it's a later text we have that uses Kyrios, an abbreviated form, which they try to equate with Kyrios in 1 Corinthians 8:6. We don't have many Kyrioi in Deuteronomy 6:4, do we? No, we have many Kyrioi in 1 Corinthians 8:6 because that's who it's being contrasted with. That's what that Kyrios is meant to be compared with, not Kyrios in Deuteronomy 6:4 representing the divine name. Does everyone see this? I mean, I'm trying to make it as clear as I can and give you as much information that will help you to see clearly where these people have gone awry, right? Crazy. And it's not always easy. There's a lot going on with manuscripts, words, grammar, and terms, but I've tried to make it simple. I've tried to give you at least an understanding that won't require you to get like a special education. So you can actually see what's happening in 1 Corinthians 8:6. You can see the difference between one Lord Jesus Christ and Deuteronomy 6:4 in the Hebrew and in the Greek, and how they don't even understand that in Deuteronomy 6:4, yes, that's for the divine name. In 1 Corinthians 8:6, that's in contrast to the poloi kyrioi. Kyrioi poloi. It's many lords. It's not talking about Yaho. Otherwise, there wouldn't be many kyrioi, would there? Are there many Yahos? Right? That's what Paul's saying, if that's what you're saying. And it is what you're saying when it's not what he's saying. So we're not going to listen to you. We're going to say what we're saying, which is what he's saying, not you. Then we have the actual grammatical parallel with Deuteronomy 6:4 in the Septuagint, later used with non-divine name in Galatians 3:20, where it uses God, not Lord. So even Paul didn't choose Lord as the equivalent. Why? Because as we showed, right, what Septuagint was Paul likely using? Sorry, looking at your guys' stuff there. What Septuagint was Paul likely using? Right here. The one with the divine name. At least according to all the available evidence, right? So there's no reason at all for him to use Lord, Kyrios, in Galatians 3:20 when he's using the exact same grammar of Deuteronomy 6:4. Right? Whereas if he did have a Septuagint that uses Kyrios, then he probably would have used Kyrios there, right? It's the exact same description, exact same grammar. So while he wouldn't have had to have, right, if he was that familiar with the Shema having replaced the divine name with Kyrios, I don't know. It seems a little odd that he's using Theos. You might say, well, why isn't he using the divine name? Well, he's not quoting the Shema here. He's just using parallel grammar, which I think would have flowed a little better with Kyrios if that's what he saw in the Shema of Deuteronomy 6:4. Plus, he's writing to the Galatians, right? People, I think like Dr. White and Sam and others Trinitarians, they don't understand. They keep thinking, whenever they say like Lord, and they would have thought of the Shema and the divine name, they don't seem to understand. They weren't always writing to Jews in that way, where they would have had that kind of reference point for those terms, even if the grammar was the same. Like in Galatians 3:20, right? I don't think the Galatians would have necessarily understood the divine name as much as they would have understood God here, right? I think Paul, it just made more sense for him to talk to them as Greeks using theos, right? He's not theos. He's not quoting a text with the divine name, so he doesn't have to use it. He's going to use what's going to make most sense to them, and whether or not that was the divine name for those in Galatia, I don't know. So for me, it's more a question of what's being quoted. If they're quoting a text in the Old Testament with the divine name in the New Testament, I don't see how you could quote it as containing anything but the divine name. The Hebrew scriptures contain the divine name, and every text of the Septuagint that we have, datable to the 1st century and earlier, that would have been available to quote in the New Testament era, contains the divine name as well. So I believe they have it all wrong. I believe they have their Old Testament's wrong, obviously, right? And they don't even care, right? These translations of the Hebrew Bible, everyone, they all have the divine name. They don't use it, though. So this idea that Trinitarians would use the divine name in their translations of the Septuagint or the New Testament, if they had text with it, is incorrect. Not only do we have text with the divine name in it in the Septuagint, like I showed you, but we have the divine name in the Hebrew text all over the place, and they still don't use it, either in their translations of the Old Testament or of the New Testament writers' quotations of those Old Testament texts, including texts like Psalm 110:1, which, as we know, in the Old Testament, uses the divine name and Lord. But in the New Testament, the way these Trinitarians have them quoting it, you don't see the divine name in either one. You're lucky if you get the divine name as Lord in all caps, distinguished from Lord not in all caps in Psalm 110:1, which often isn't even carried over to the New Testament translation, which quotes it. So it's a catastrophe in every way, right? They failed. They followed Middle Platonism away from one God the Father into Trinitarianism, and they fell from the Middle Platonist lie that God can't have a name or he'd be created or have his elder, the one who gave it to him, because he's the one who named himself. They fail everything where it concerns the Bible, the God of the Bible, the Lord of the Bible, how many lords there are, how many gods there are, and how many God is. How many Lord the Lord is, right? Or YHWH is, I should say. I kind of replaced it there. It didn't make as much sense because it never does, right? We're not supposed to replace it. But in later texts of the Septuagint, that's what happened. And that's what led to the confusion in people like Dr. White and Sam, who don't take the time to reflect on these texts and understand what they're actually saying in their context. 1 Corinthians 8:6 has nothing to do with the Shema of Deuteronomy 6:4 in terms of the one Lord Jesus Christ. If anything, it does in terms of the one God the Father, which is the exact term used of the God who is one in Galatians 3:20, which is the same grammar of Deuteronomy 6:4 in the Septuagint that Paul would have had, but with a divine name, right? According to all evidence. So now let me just take a look at your questions, though I did see someone did bring that up. So before I end things, hopefully this stream was helpful to you. I believe I covered all the essential information that I wanted to share. I'm going to be talking about the canon and these three main versions of the Septuagint that Jerome talked about and said the whole world was divided by in the late 4th century. And as we can see from the 1st century and earlier, the whole world was united when it came to the Septuagint and its use of the divine name. Not necessarily in the form, but I believe they all meant the same thing. YHWH. All right, let's take a look at your questions here. Appreciate you guys joining me. Sorry about things collapsing yesterday, but I have a new setup. As you can see, it's not totally perfect yet, but we're at least doing something right. Okay. Let me just see if there were any specific questions, and I'll try to answer them while I'm here. It was good to have you all. NZ Brandon again. Sean in. True and Glue. Ronnie Kalakalar. Zahar. Betsy. Morning, son. Life here and beyond. Good to see you. Quest for the Christ. Very nice. Let's see, I'm looking for questions though, so I'm kind of trying to scan through what I'm seeing here. Wish the light wasn't kind of faded on me. I was like, oh no, I finally got everything set, and then I had to, but I didn't want to delay it. Oh well, lighting is lighting. We do the best we can here. Let's see. GeoLab, good to see you. Looking for questions. My apologies if I miss anybody. Yeah, you don't see all the books. There's a whole, you only see half the wall. There's a whole another half of the wall, and then there's a whole kind of wall here. Excuse me, a lot of good stuff here. A lot of my technical stuff and volumes right here. And then I have an office out there. But it's not how many books you have, it's how many books you read, of course. And I do my best. I think I covered it all. I tried my best to try to anticipate and understand the things Trinitarians bring up and have brought up, and that Sam and Dr. White bring up and brought up recently. I think I explained the differences between the texts, how it can't possibly be the equivalent of the divine name in 1 Corinthians 8:6, one Lord. The better context of understanding many lords and many gods. And the Greek context is a better place for viewing that. And how the very use of many lords in comparison to the one Lord shows that can't be the divine name they're talking about. So, and the grammar is totally different, as we showed. Talked about a lot of other stuff. I do have a couple other videos I'm going to be putting up. One on the transcendental argument for God. I'll have that up in a couple days. I'm also going to put a clip up probably about whether the Trinity contradicts itself that I kind of talked about in the failed show yesterday. But I thought that part was okay. Maybe I'll clip that. Excuse me. Okay, here's a question. This let me see here. I don't see a lot of questions though, so that's kind of good. At least hopefully I did a good job. But here's one. Life Here and Beyond says, Greg, can you please address a Trinitarian accusation of Unitarians assuming Unitarianism? Yes, well, Dr. White, he's accused me of that as well. They all do that. Okay, so what are they saying? Well, what they're saying is we're starting out with the belief that God is, well, okay, by Unitarianism, that can mean a couple different, I'm just going to say that means that God's one person, okay? Let's just say what that means, and if you want to clarify, go ahead. When they say Stafford, if he's like me, or about other Unitarians, but he said that about me, even though I'm not a Unitarian. But in terms of believing God is one person, I'm a Unitarian, of course. I believe Jesus pre-existed as the Son of God in heaven. So either way, that aside, when they say you're assuming Unitarianism, what they're saying is, it's actually kind of a put down, right? They're saying, you've already decided, okay? You're without even looking at the evidence, you've already told yourself or people you listen to, you've already made up your mind, this can only mean a Unitarian view of God. That's what they mean. You've already decided this can only mean God's one person. You're assuming Unitarianism. You've already decided. When in fact, right, if you're like me anyway, I decide God's one person because of the evidence, right? I'm not going to the Bible with this belief I came up with on my own or heard that God is one person. And I'm coming to the Bible and I'm saying, okay, well, whatever verse I see where it says God, I have already decided that only means one person. No, I'm going to the Bible and I'm reading what it says and I'm figuring out, oh, there's one person that's God, the Father. But others are called God and speak and act as God for him. But they're not really God. They just speak and act for him. And he allows that and it doesn't break Scripture. Okay, so what's really happening though is Trinitarians are assuming the Trinity. Now, you might say, well, Greg, you're just saying that because they're saying you're assuming Unitarianism. No. There's a difference. And in part, Life Here and Beyond, this is why they kind of lead with this. This is why Trinitarians actually, they like to get to this before you because they're paranoid. They're insecure that you're going to get it, that's them, right? They believe, right? The Bible doesn't teach the Trinity. Now, see, right there, they're going to say, see, you assume Unitarianism. No, I read the Bible, and what I read showed me that God's one person. And I'm happy to go over each of those verses with you to show you why I concluded that, okay? That's not assuming Unitarianism. That's me telling you what I've concluded based on my review of the evidence. Can you say that Trinitarians concluded that the Trinity is what's taught in the Bible by reviewing the biblical evidence? Maybe, right? And certainly they did at one point, but I believe that's because of their Greek philosophical leanings. Whether that would happen today, just on your own, right? Someone just reading the Bible. Maybe. Okay, and if that's the case, if you just picked up the Bible and you read it, you read John 1:1, all these verses, and you concluded without anything else, God's a Trinity. Okay, well, then you didn't assume Trinitarianism. You just concluded based on your reading. I think you're wrong, and in that case, I would then challenge your evidence. I would say, well, I read the same evidence you read. You concluded that means God's a Trinity. I read the same evidence, and I concluded he's one person. So now we have to compare our evidence, look at it in light of its historical context, what it could possibly or likely have meant based on that historical context, and the grammar and the historical associations of the terms used in the text, right? All the best evidence would then have to be compared to see, okay, who got the better conclusion? And that's how two people who didn't assume their view would then go about resolving a different conclusion. Now, if you grow up in a household and you're taught God is a Trinity before you read the Bible, and then you grow up and then you believe God's a Trinity, but you haven't read the Bible, but then you start reading the Bible, and when you read the word God, you haven't like studied it or like done the analysis and weighed the evidence. You just start reading and immediately see God as Trinity. You're assuming the Trinity, right? Because you were told it apart from reading the actual text and evaluating the evidence. And so you just start reading it in light of what you were told. That's assuming what you believe before you actually read the evidence. Same as if you grew up in a Watchtower household and you were taught that God is one person, the Father, but you never read the Bible. And then later you read the Bible, but before you actually get to any of the text evaluation and evidence, like comparative evaluations, you just start with Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created, and you immediately believe, okay, God's one person. Now, you might be able to argue, I think, more effectively that it makes more sense the way the singular pronouns and verbs are used there in the translations. You'd conclude God's one person more quickly than a Trinitarian would conclude he's three. But you'd still be assuming that he's one person if you just right out of the gate assumed. It's a more natural assumption because beings are typically one person, right? So yes, there are differences, but it's still an assumption if you're not actually basing it on evidence. Again, the Trinity requires a special leap, though. This isn't based on normal experience or exposure to terms typically used, right? And it's a special definition of a singular being in a way that conforms with Platonistic thinking that tries to make sense of Jesus and the way he's talked about in the Bible without just understanding that beings like Jesus in the Bible, spirit sons of God, angels, they're spirits born from spirit, like Jesus says in John 3. What's born from flesh is flesh. What's born from spirit is spirit. Those are natures. And those natures give birth to individual instances of those natures. There's no birth within a nature that's the same being, right? The father giving birth to a son that's still part of his actual fatherly being. That's not possible. And that's what I was talking about yesterday. So it's much different on the assumption scale, right? And they're out of control because they're trying to fit a doctrine into the Bible that was never meant to be there. The Bible doesn't present God and the sons of God and these angels the way Middle Platonists and Trinitarians do. It presents God and these angels as spirits, individual spirits, but that either follow or don't follow the one God and represent him or don't represent him in all they say and do. Okay, so in one sense, there is only one, because all the ones that do and say only what he does, it's all the same, right? There's your one in the many, the one God the Father, and the many sons of God. They're all individual spirits and beings, though. It's not polytheism in the sense that they describe. Although the terms actually used in 1 Corinthians 8:6 basically say polytheism, right? Theoi polloi, many gods, there are, asin, right? But it's the same sense in which Jesus said the sons of God are gods without breaking scripture. No, he's not calling people gods there. It's so crazy. He says, is it not written? I said. And he quotes the exact words where God says, I say. So people are so confused. They're lost. You guys got to be careful, okay? Be careful. Don't let all these voices into your head. These people are gone, right? They say things unless you're really thinking hard and you're going to do the work, or listen to people who've done the work and who care about you and don't just want your money and want you to support their platform and ridiculousness. You got to be careful. A lot of false teachers have gone forth into the world. Remember that text? So hopefully that answers your question, Life Here and Beyond. Let me see if there's anything else before we wrap it up, because I probably won't be back for at least a month or two. I will be back, though, definitely by the end of May or first week of June, maybe earlier. Maybe I can get back here in a month or so, like in early April, and we'll do another live show. And then once we get into like start of June through August, I'll be here multiple times a month, okay? Because I'm going to be super busy in the fall with school and work. But a lot of good things are happening. You guys should have faith. Try to find at least one other person, if you can, to partake with regularly. Check in on each other. Say a prayer. You don't have to get too involved if you don't want to. Read a proverb, whatever it takes. Read a saying of Jesus. Just have a moment. If you can. It doesn't have to be every day, but every time you can, that's what you need. Stay strong and steady. Remember, this is not a race. It's a marathon. Okay, we have to have endurance. We have to endure to the end. So don't become downhearted. We don't know when the end will come. It could come tomorrow. Who knows? It's not going to come because of Watchtower, though, or because of anyone falsely teaching things. It's going to come because God says it's time. And when that time comes, so be it. Until that time, we have time. And we should use it wisely to praise Jah and do good and help other people where we can without being taken advantage of. We have a lot of damaged people out there. We have a lot of Trinitarians and others who don't really like a lot of what we do. Some may respect it a little, but a lot of them they're opposed to us. Don't be fooled. Watchtower people, they know. Okay? Yes, sometimes things overlap, but ultimately, no. They're not going to accept you. And you need to be careful. Or you could find yourself with the wrong people too often in ways that are going to depress you. But you do you, right? We all have to stand before the Master. And that's ultimately what it's all about. Everett Commodore, good to see you. Good citations of texts. Lambert 316 Hope says, I read the Bible 4 times with zero outside influence and came to the conclusion that God was one. He had a son before creation and became flesh and our Savior. You know, I had the exact same beliefs when I finished, Lambert. So I think we're seeing the same things. Yeah, and you know, you're just not going to come up with the Trinity. But if you did, and someone didn't tell you beforehand, at least you could say you didn't assume it. So there's that. I'll be back, everybody. I will be back. let's just go ahead and wrap it up. It's so good to see you guys again. I hope I covered the subject well for you and that you are not confused at all about 1 Corinthians 8:6, its use of one Lord, and the Lord who is one, Yaho, Deuteronomy 6:4, God who is one, the Father, Galatians 3:20, the one God between us, who is on the other side of us and between whom is the one mediator. All of these things should be clear. I think we covered them clearly. They're presented clearly. It's others who distort them. And things like the divine name, which we covered, I think, to a sufficient extent, do sometimes make them less clear. That's why we talk about it. But I'm going to present this track. I'll post it on the community forum when it's in its final form, okay? And let's see. I'll post a few videos coming up soon as well. And now it was good. I think we covered a lot of good information, from the divine name to the understanding of Lord, one God, how many is God. That's important. Important distinction, predicate, attributive. They abuse that all the time. So hopefully it was clear tonight for you. With that having been said, may Jah bless you. And I will see you again, Jah willing, in the not too distant future. In Jesus' name.